It's just unbelievable what's been created by good, sound entrepreneurs. Our government and certainly our academic institutions have had a very low view of business. But honestly, without business slash entrepreneurship, everything would go away in about 4 hours. Like you could take all of the therapists and counselors and pastors and college professors and political officials off the planet into a spaceship for a week and nothing would happen.
Right.
You take all the salespeople, entrepreneurs, business folks off the planet, and 4 hours later, the whole world economies completely collapsed. That's how important they are. And so I got a real heart for business folks. Like I grew up, for example, in the traditional evangelical church. I mean, I still go to church, and I will tell you, even growing up in that space, you would think it would be encouraging to folks, but I was taught sort of business is like a like a necessary evil or whatever, you know, and then you realize it is central to almost everything. This entrepreneurial move, the idea of making things better, like even if you look theologically, like when you start in the very beginning of the Bible, there's a garden, and then you get to the end of the Bible, there's a garden city. You see there's progress, right?
Yeah.
There's things that improve. And I love working with people who are improving things. I love being a part of gigantic leaps like that. Like if you fundamentally look at history, like our Constitution was a gigantic leap, right? It was an entrepreneurial move. And I love being a part of stuff like that. So yeah, I give my life really and my heart to entrepreneurs who want to change the game, because I feel like that's what we're put on earth to do.
It's an interesting point you bring up about the church. My dad passed away last year, but he was on the podcast a few years ago. So folks might remember the episode or can go back and listen to it. But I'm a pastor's kid. He was a pastor when I was born, and then for the first couple of years of my life. But he didn't leave the church. He remained as a teaching elder and ended up teaching adult Sunday school kind of throughout my life. But he left pastoring a church because he wanted to be an entrepreneur and was running into a lot of the problems that you're talking about theologically within the church. People were talking about, work is something you have to do, right? And yes, it must be devoted to God, but it's separate from your spiritual life. It's, what you do Monday through Friday, and then what you do Saturday, and then what you do Sunday. Those are all different buckets and different things. When in reality, it's an integrated life that's been designed, right? My dad was, he went and studied at L'Abri with Francis Schaeffer. And so, Dr. Schaeffer's works, shaped quite a bit of his worldview, and obviously have ultimately shaped quite a bit of my worldview as well. And obviously that I think applies spiritually, but that's also a good lesson at large for anybody to think about. Like, we live integrated lives. We don't live separate lives. And I think, I love what your wife said to you, pausing the movie and saying, is this something that you actually want to do? Because military service members and military veterans, we end up letting go of the things that we want to do because we're serving a specific unit, accomplishing a specific mission. And when you're in, those are really important things to do, right? Like, you do need to be subservient to the mission, still think critically for yourself, depending on the type of unit that you're in. You get a little bit more leeway here and there, right? But then all of a sudden the DoD and our branch of service says, okay, you're out, go figure it out. Well, then we're left with this mindset, this understanding of, well, I guess I just got to go do what I can do. I guess I just have to go do what I'm qualified to do. And instead of nurturing that want, that desire, that interest that we want to scratch the itch for, we just end up saying, okay, I'm just going to go do this thing.
It's unbelievable. Like how you just described that is, I think, perfect. By the way, your dad sounds very Presbyterian, teaching elder. I don't know what
PCA. Yeah, PCA.
PCA. Yeah. So by the way, I was in the PCA for like 8 years.
Yeah.
And then I was a member of an even more conservative church called the OPC, which is the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. It's a long history between those two churches. I'm not in those anymore, just letting you know. My view on spiritual gifts sort of pushed me out of those those realms. But anyway, it's interesting that you said want. This is so important. I love the way that you laid this out. So my working premise operates like this. Psalm 37:4 says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And my fundamental premise is that there's something deep down inside of every person that you really want to do that was planted there a long time ago from God. So people come up to me all the time because I help people accomplish their mission, right? And they'll go, I don't even know what God wants me to do. And I'll go, well, what do you want to do? And they're like, what I really want to do is work with kids. And I'm like, start there. Because a lot of times you don't have to actually spend a lot of time asking, what do you want me to do? A lot of times God gives you that as your desires. And certainly those desires can be corrupted or turned away by different things or teaching or motives or whatever. But generally speaking, those things are really pure. And what I help entrepreneurs do primarily, like the book over my shoulder I mentioned, is brings people into a conversation with God. The idea is to start to let loose on those things that you actually have been given and want to do. And so it's interesting, speaking of your dad, is there's a group of people that I end up attracting a lot of ministry folks who are like, you know what? I want to write a book. I want to do some consulting. I want to go help businesses, because the ministry space, as wonderful as it is, doesn't compensate people properly because the labor is worthy of his wages. And you got some dude who's leading a 5,000 person church. And in the real world, that guy would be getting paid $4 million a year. And at the church world, he's getting paid $200,000 a year, which isn't bad, but he's looking outside like, man, I could be doing a lot better. And so what they end up doing is following money follows value, right? So they end up following a place where they can do value. And I've run out of fingers and toes to count the number of guys I've mentored who are in that ministry space that came out and now are in the entrepreneurial space. And I will just go so far as to say they're actually better in that space for the kingdom, like ministry wise, than they were over here, which is fascinating when you think about it. I mean, we beat this sacred secular thing in the 1600s. And for some reason, people still think like, I heard it just the other day, the highest calling is to be a pastor. I'm like, I love my pastor and I honor my pastor, but it is not the highest calling. That's not even in the book anywhere. And the whole Reformation was about that, for crying out loud, you know? So like, I thought we solved that problem in 1630 or whatever, but I digress.
Yeah. I mean, the highest calling is what you're called to.
Yeah, that's right.
And at the end of the day, like you said, you know, whether you're a believer and you're having a conversation with God, or whether you're not, and you're having a conversation with a higher source, or however people want to frame it for themselves, like, it's not somebody else's responsibility. It's your responsibility to follow the breadcrumbs that are in front of you, right? You have to, I always say, do the work that's right in front of you and then see what happens. And that thing that happens might keep you on that path, but it might branch out to some other paths. Explore. Don't be dumb, right? You know, don't just be blind. Don't have blind allegiance to anything, right? Think critically, use your mind, but follow your heart. I always tell my daughter, I say, trust your gut, follow your heart.
Yeah, very good.
Right?
Oh, I like that.
And like that will get you along, and then you build momentum.